Hi, I'm Amy.
And I'm Kirsty.
And this is our podcast covering the highs, lows, and realities of parenting a child with neurodiversity.
Each week we'll be sharing updates from our lives and hearing from a variety of guests about their advice and experiences.
This is Love Needs No Words. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Love Needs No Words. Today we are joined by Jessie Townz, who has a 7-year-old boy with a PDA profile. Jessie home educated her son for 2 years and now through her Instagram page at Mrs. Jessie Townz is spreading the word of PDA and supporting other parents who have children with a PDA profile, as well as offering support to teachers and learning staff who have a PDA in their setting. Jessie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Kirsty, for inviting me. As I said a minute ago, sorry I'm in my car for true PDA parent lifestyle. Just,
We're here to keep it real.
Yeah, trying to I'm so glad I'm sat out. I'm not in my house and I'm sat in my car. But yeah, the demand was getting quite fraught at home, so it's just easier for me to come here.
No, I really appreciate it. Thank you. I guess a good place to start is by asking you, what is a PDA profile for those listening that don't know, and what should parents be looking out for?
I said this all along. We'd never even heard of PDA till about 4 years ago. Absolutely, very sort of in tune with neurodiversity, ASD, Asperger's, and sort of all the other things. But PDA was put on our radar as a profile for Maxie very early on at nursery. So PDA stands for Pathological Demand Avoidance, and it sounds really terrifying. Basically, it's a constant drive for autonomy. So any demand that you put on them, they see it as a demand, like even something as simple as can you get your shoes on, they see it as a demand. So their brain registers it as a threat, so they go into fight, flight or freeze mode. Now the pathological bit is it's actually instilled within them, i.e. it's in their nervous system, so it's something that they'll never grow out of. They will always have it. The profile bit, the problem that the world has with PDA, any sort of medical conditions are listed in the DSM-5 manual, aren't they? And that's the diagnostics medical manual, which is obviously generated from the States. So PDA doesn't actually it's not a medical diagnosis. It's not a standalone medical diagnosis. I always say it's trying to fit a square square block into like a circular hole. It fitted, but it just didn't fit properly. So they came up with PDA that it sits within the autism spectrum, but they cannot medically diagnose it as a primary diagnosis anywhere across the world. I mean, in the States and Australia, they don't even profile it. So we're actually quite advanced in the UK at the moment. And there are some medical trusts, bizarrely, the medical trusts that are up north in the northeast of the country have had children that have actually been diagnosed with it as a primary diagnosis alongside other autistic spectrum disorder symptoms, but also as their primary diagnosis, which is amazing.
So did you say it was picked up in nursery?
Yeah, we've got an older child, Leon, and he went to the same nursery, so we knew the staff, and obviously Max is a twin, and everything was really, really hunky dory in terms of developmental. It was absolutely on point until he got to about 3.5, and there were a few indications at nursery. He's very, very good at counting very, very early on. But when they change rooms, obviously they change them age, they move them rooms, don't they, age appropriate. When they got moved to the preschool room, the demand, obviously, it wasn't so nicey, just sit and play. They start to prep them for primary school, don't they?
Yeah.
And as soon as they become more rigid structure and routine, that's when we started to see a little bit of a kickback. Not super violent, but if he just didn't want to do something, he just refused to do it. He'd throw things, he'd kick, he'd bite, all things that actually for a 4-year-old is actually quite a normal thing. But then it started to get much more frequent, and we started to get a bit concerned about it. But then because they're born in October, I kind of put it down to the fact that they are just bored, they need to go to school. I remember saying to my husband, I just think they're ready for school. And because of the year where they are born in the year, they were obviously the oldest when they went to primary school. So we were like, they're just really bored of like sticking bits of pasta on a bit of paper and, And then there was quite a few serious incidents where he was like flipping tables and chairs. And then we had a chat with the nursery teacher, and she said to us, I think that we should maybe, for the school application, maybe somebody from the local authority should come in and just observe him. And we were like, yeah, that's fine. We'd already sat there and had a chat. And one of the sort of the senior like team leaders, she'd said to me on the side outside, she's like, I think it may be worth you looking at something called PDA. And I was a bit like, I don't know what that is. And she said, well, my eldest son's got it. He can get quite violent because they just can't cope with this constant being asked to do things. And I was really dismissive to start with. I was just like, for me, he's hit all the developmental milestones. Yeah, there was a few things, the counting backwards from like 100 and, things now that actually are quite an autistic trait. But because everything else was all on, in terms of development, everything else was all like that milestone where it should have been. We didn't really question it that much. And so the local authority came, they were like, yeah, it'll be absolutely fine to go to school. And then off of that, we obviously did primary school application, and then they started school. And that is really when it went horribly, horribly wrong.
Okay. So that transition into school, or just the kind of shift in terms of demands in school being so much more than nursery?
Well, the thing is, Kirsty, looking at it now, it was a couple of elements. So I am very lucky in my employment that I get to have the summer holidays off. So I had the summer holiday off anyway. So because they went 3 full days a week, it made sense that they finished at the end of July and they had the summer off with me, and then they started school in the middle of September. And then from the moment, obviously, they're starting to talk that last sort of term in nursery, there's a real push on that transition of them starting reception. So and he started to get really, really anxious and really quite stressed out, constantly asking us questions like, where am I going to school, like who's going to be in my class, is Jake going to be with me? And we sort of said, actually no, we're going to separate you at classes, because their mainstream classroom is a three class entry per year. I said, but my eldest son had been there, so we know the layout of the school. I said, but you'll be next to each other, because you get to be. And throughout the whole of the summer holidays, he had this really, really insane urination issue where he was going to the toilet, I swear to you, about must have been 25 to 30 times a day, because his anxiety levels had started to shoot through the roof. I mean, God, we ended up at A&E, he ended up at a night in hospital. We were and then he's getting tested for diabetes, like tumors. It was really stressful.
Bless you, yeah.
But it was a non-verbal prompt from him that his anxiety levels are through the roof. And because we've never really seen anxiety to that degree, because preschool's easy, isn't it, and nursery is a bit of a doddle. But like I said, leading up, the last sort of year, there had been these indications that he was getting more and more stressed out. But he was actually okay at home. But then when they started school, by the time they'd broken up for Christmas in the December, so they'd been there nearly 3 months, he was already been removed from the classroom environment itself. It's an open plan infant layout, so the classroom, had been removed and was sitting on a table away from the class. And I think, from being at nursery and preschool, where it's all nice and easy, isn't it? Then it's like you've got to sit down, you've got to sit here, you've got to do this, you've got to read, you've got to do that. And even though infants, reception in year 1 and 2 is primarily child led, and it's play led learning, there was still an expectation that he had to sit down, sit there, do this, do what the whole class was doing, and he just couldn't cope. And then they kind of went back after Christmas, and it just got even worse. It was insane.
That must have been so stressful. How did that feel? Because obviously you'd had your son go through school previously.
Yeah, and we know the heads, we know the teachers, we know them very well, even though we had nothing, we hadn't been to the school for 6 years because of the age difference between the boys. As they have to, they are an education setting, and the reality was, as much as they cared for Maxie and his need, when he was in the moment in the classroom, they have they have the priority, they have safeguarding of other children. We started to get phone calls. He was, they were very transparent with us and sort of said, look, listen, we need to try and sort of do different things. We need to try different techniques. We need to try different strategies, because he is just getting so stressed out in class. And then there was one, the little tables that they all sit at. He got so stressed out, he'd like picked a table up and thrown it. Then he'd thrown a chair. So then what they had to do was evacuate the entire reception, like 90 kids.
Right.
He's so upset, which then caused him. The thing is with PDA, there's quite a lot of they have such low self-esteem. They in the aftermath of it, they suffer from a lot of shame and really low self-esteem. So even though because that pathological part of it that it is instilled in him because it's nervous system, he can't control how he reacts. But once he's calmed himself down and he realizes that he's terrified people, he's then so upset.
Yeah.
But then they've got to protect the other children, and we were completely on board with school. We said I completely understand, but what about our son? What is going to happen? He is entitled to his education. So we kind of bumbled along until the Easter, and then it just was getting even worse. He just didn't want to go in. We were getting school refusals. There was a fridge where they used to keep the snacks in for the infants, and he got so stressed out one day he tried to push it over, and he nearly managed to push it over onto another child. And then when they tried to sort of intervene and remove him from it, he like hit the teacher. And so then we started to see exclusions and suspensions from school. It was quite upsetting. We sort of, he's 5. This isn't fair. They were like, but we have to protect the other children. And as much as it was really stressful, it was actually beneficial in the long term.
Yeah.
Because of the story and the case and the fight that we had to put up with of our LA, that environment, because that's what Max's behavior is what you call an externalizing PDA. So he externalizes, like he's external. He's very like, he will call you a dickhead. He will throw something at you. He will go for you. He will kick you. And that actually, as stressful as it can be for those around, when you are fighting against a local authority, that is exactly what you want, really, because the issue with an internalizing PDA who basically masks, so they put this mask on, they go into that education setting and they conform with the children around them. That is very difficult then to quantify to a local authority, because so much of the decision making with LAs and EHCPs, especially school, a lot of the weighted statements are weighted from the school. If they don't see that child demonstrating that behaviour, they're like, oh, they're absolutely fine here. Then you've got disparity between home life and school life, what the parents are saying versus the reality in class, and that is when I always feel so sad for parents that like my child's absolutely fine at school, but when they come home, because then a lot of the time they face a massive struggle with their local authority trying to quantify the evidence that their child is in the wrong environment because they're masking at school.
Yes.
And the reality is, teachers, an internalizing PDA, there will be significant signs and actions in that classroom, even as an internalizer, that they have a PDA profile. But a mainstream school teacher with another 29 kids in their class is never going to notice it.
No.
Like that is the reality. I think to start with initially after the exclusion, I mean, we weren't talking like an afternoon here. Some of the incidents were, throwing, they had an open library and that a lot of the neurodivergent children were going there for quiet time. And I walked in one day and he was pulling like hundreds and hundreds of books off the shelves, like throwing them and screaming. And it was like something out of a war zone. There was like books flying everywhere. Everybody was like ducking. Kids were screaming. And then because he just couldn't control it, that time I think he was excluded for like 5 days, and it fell on a Monday, so you had like an extra week off, and then you're trying to get them back in, and it was so stressful.
How do you deal with that at home, Jessie? What was the approach for like you and your partner? Because you talk a bit about that on your Instagram page. It's very difficult dealing with that with the child that has a PDA profile.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you, Amy. once they are in the right education setting, I mean, his behaviour is by no means perfect, and his behaviour is still very PDA, but the significant difference it's made since he started his specialist school in October. I mean, it's kind of plateaued out a bit because they spend obviously so much time at school.
Yeah.
But when he was in the thick of it in reception, it was slowly starting to build up to getting him burnt out. I mean, he was absolutely unbearable at home for probably, and an awful thing to say about my baby, my youngest child, but it was hell. I'm not gonna lie, like we were really in the trenches with it for a good year or so. Then on top of everything else, then you've got to do all the fighting with LAs and EPs and OTs and all this stuff. For us, we just, low demand parenting is what is the key to everything. Everyone's like, was low demand. People say, oh, you're letting them get away with it, it's you're not letting them get away with it. You just can't give them any demand. There was at points where he would just lay on the sofa for days on end. They restricted his timetable, which was in agreement with us. They restricted his timetable. He was going in for 8:40, and we were collecting him. It was supposed to be until lunchtime, but it became very apparent once we started it. He just didn't. It just even that the mornings were getting too long. That 8:40 till 11:45. It's a big, substantial chunk of the day, and he just couldn't do it. So then it got whittled down to about 11 o'clock, and then it was 10:30, then it was 10 o'clock, and then he ended up going in for about an hour. We wanted to keep him on roll because our local authority deregistering and taking a child off roll is basically you're going to get even more significant issue there, because they'll just be like, well, you took them off roll, it's your issue now, you deal with it. Because obviously every LA has a different set of rules, and like when you go around the country, like this is another wild thing. It's not a consistent standardization. I mean, insane. Summer holidays though, summer came along, absolutely great summer. I was off again. We went away. My best mate lives in Abu Dhabi. We were away for about 3.5 weeks. There was, I think there was two meltdowns in like 3.5 weeks. But because, just going with the flow, just chilling on holiday.
Yes.
And then the mad urinating came back again about 2 weeks before we were due back to school.
How did it feel for you, Jessie? Like, it must have been really hard seeing him, so happy in Abu Dhabi, really chilled, and then that kind of build up again.
We'd been home educating when he'd been out of school, because he was going on these massive long periods of school where he wasn't attending, he was excluded, or he wouldn't go in, or when he was getting there and he was going in for like an hour a day to an hour and a half, like I can't just let him sit and do anything. So we're trying to home educate, and it was actually okay really through reception, because it wasn't really that much that needed to be done. But the year one, I mean, by about 2 weeks, it was a nightmare. I mean, I was starting to get really stressed out about it now, because it had affected, my husband and I have both got really good careers. And I am part-time, which is, thank God.
Yeah.
But, and we'd both been transparent with our employers, and we'd sort of said, look, listen, we're having to take days, we're having to take annual leave. I get unpaid parental leave, like 16 weeks for every child that I've got. So we're having to now sort of take chunks of days, and it was starting to get quite stressful, because as well as the fact we didn't know what the hell was going on with Maxie, we've also got two other children, one which is by default is twin brothers. So they spend every single day together, have been together their entire life from the moment they've been born, and as much as they fight like cat and dog, or like an old married couple, they are incredibly close. So there was the stress that his classroom was next to Max's. So when he could see all hell breaking loose, he then started breaking. He started losing his mind. So then he was trying to get out of school. He was really stressed out. And I'm having to do 2 school runs. One's coming home, one's going. And my eldest son, he was seeing her like he's such a pain in the ass. Like that was his like teenage response. Like, why is he so difficult? We were just getting through the application for the HCP at this point. So they said, look, we can send him to a pupil referral unit. And I was a bit like, oh my God, he's going to a Prue school. Like, Jesus Christ, like this is where like naughty kids go. That was my understanding. Like, I'm 45. So for me, like a Prue school historically is like where all the naughty kids went to. And I was thinking, oh my God. So we spoke to them, we went and saw it, and we were like, wow, what an amazing school. Like it was amazing. He stayed there for an entire term. Oh my God. And in the space of about 3 weeks, I mean, it took him a while to get into the swing of it. You know, at this point, he's only just turned 6.
Yeah.
And he was getting picked up in a car by himself, cruising off, you know, like in this car, cruising off by himself. And I was like, ah. And he was like, bye. Just
Oh, bless him.
But anyway, he was chaotic for 3 weeks, but within
What a
a month,
difference.
mate, he was an absolutely different child. But the whole point of him being referred to the Peru school was so that they could work with him, work with his skill set, find out strategies that they could find out that worked in a smaller
Yeah.
environment. I mean, there was only 6 kids in his class. There was only like 28 children in the entire school. His primary school teachers would then visit frequently, and it was this whole collaboration, and we'll all work together. We're going to get the skills and the strategies, and he's going to be able to go back to mainstream school. And I said from the get-go, there is absolutely no way he's going to be able to be integrated back into mainstream school. It's the class sizes, it's the noise, it's the hassle, it's the chaoticness. But we were like, yeah. And by this point, we got his EHCP. So obviously, the local authority was like, nah, he can go to a mainstream school with with an ASD unit. But it's the moment you mention a PDA profile, they were like, no, not a chance. And then we randomly found an SEMH school. And I was we've been looking at ASD schools. I mean, what had happened is his EHCP from the first EHCP, the first 8 months of his EHCP said ASD unit with a mainstream school. Anyway, we were just like, it's just not going to work. It's just not going to work. He needs specialist provision, full stop. So then we had all this quantitative paperwork and evidence that he was absolutely right as rain, the model student in a small specialist setting.
Yes.
And the moment he went back to mainstream, the behaviour started. And I was like, to be honest with you, we saw a real minimal amount of dysregulated behaviour. Yeah, don't get me wrong, he's obviously got PDA, but at home, we know how to deal with it. It went back to panel. Panel put a specialist, changed it from a mainstream with an ASD and put specialist school placement. Panel then named the specialist school last May. So, it's been going on for 2 years. And then there was you wait for the transitions team to get in touch from the council. Like that took another month. And then they're like, yeah, we can go there, but we need the specialist school has to contact us. And then it just dragged on. And then it was the summer holidays. So obviously everybody disappeared. So we had no idea what was going on from like the start of June. And then the summer holidays happened. And I was like, where is he actually going to school? So I sort of said, they've named, it can't go on for much longer. Like we're at the end. So he never went back to school. He never went back to mainstream in September. We were like, we'll just keep him off. I had a phone call from the headmaster and he said, listen, the reason why we're taking so long is the rejection was because we don't want him to have, he's suffering from education trauma because, Max was in burnout, for that massive chunk of that time when he was at mainstream. And he said, what we want to avoid is any more sort of education trauma. So we need to make sure, because we want to make sure that when he comes to school, like he's learning, he's switched on enough. We want to make sure that this absolutely is watertight, and the next experience that he has of school is a great experience, like he did when he was at the Peru. And he said, but the reality is, Jessie, is that we need more money from the local authority because of the way the classes are. He's going to have a one-to-one TA because his age is at Key Stage 1, whereas his peers are all way below early years foundation.
Right.
He finally started about 3 weeks before the end of October half term.
Gosh. So was he out of school in that time? You were homeschooling him whilst you were waiting for a place?
Yeah, it was just pointless for like 6 weeks. We just thought there's absolutely no point, and I'd gotten into quite a good swing of it because
you had to.
I've had to, and we sort of really worked out what worked well at home, what didn't.
I'm really interested in the low demand parenting that you were talking about, because I think that's a real shift away from kind of traditional parenting, and probably something you have to get your head around. And so yeah, my son's definitely demand avoidant at points for sure, and he can
Yeah,
be quite demanding as well. And
yeah,
sometimes I feel like I'm literally, doing everything that this child wants. He's like you said, he's asking me for a drink. Off we're tottering to go and get him a drink, because you are sometimes feel like you're treading on eggshells, and you
yeah.
just don't want the consequence. And I think you can kind of start to judge, can't you, what kind of mood they're in. But
Oh
how
yeah,
do you
100%.
get your head around like that shift in, okay, this is how I need to parent my child for their
It's
well-being?
I mean, to be honest, the mindset shift is still a struggle some days, especially in the mix of all three of them are around in the same vicinity. Because, I've got a 16-year-old. I'm like, no, you can go and get your drink. You're 16, like, you don't have a nervous system disability. He's like, well, why should I if he doesn't? My husband won't mind me, and I'm throwing him under the bus here, but he really struggles with it. He's like, well, I just don't see why he can't do it himself. It's the times when it's very, very fraught in our house is generally at dinner time, because everybody's been out at work and at school. Maxie doesn't get home till about 4, 4:30, dependent on the traffic. Then we have dinner at like 6 o'clock. So it's like their last hour. I mean, witching hour at bedtime is bad enough anyway. But then when you've got a kid who's got PDA, and you're expecting them to sit at a table, sit down, eat this, TV off, that's when we started to notice when it all hell was starting to. We were seeing behaviour and language and physical actions as chaotic that it was when we
Yeah.
were in the trenches. And I sort of said, this is because you guys are just not like being low demand enough. I leave his clothes out for school the night before so he sees them. But most mornings I get him dressed, and they're like, well, he's nearly 8, can't he get himself dressed? I'm like, well, some days he can,
Yeah.
other days he can't. But this is the thing, when we talk about low demand parenting, I say to every parent, the quickest way to shift your mindset is to think, instead of thinking why won't they do that, it's that they can't do it. Physically don't have the mental capacity.
Mm.
They cannot do it. Your own kids. Like, I can tell by looking at him and speaking to him for about 5 minutes. I can tell what his anxiety levels are like, and I can generally know within probably an hour like how the day's going to go. Some days, and the other days it's madness anyway. But it's on those days of recognizing that if it's a low demand day and you can push it, like, we get so much stuff done. We can go shopping, we can live quite a actually like stress-free day. But on the days where his demand's really high, then you do need to low demand parent, i.e., you do everything for them effectively.
Yeah.
Does he know what brings on his anxiety, or is he still too young?
So he knows when he's starting to get stressed out. But there's quite a lot of moving cogs in it. There's quite a complex thing. I think, again, and I was teaching some parents this the other day, I was like, there's just a basic pyramid of triangle of physical needs that every human needs to have, and at the bottom of that are physiological. And I was like, hunger, sleep, and water.
Yeah.
If trying to get him to do anything, if he's hungry or he's not had enough sleep,
Yeah,
it
hunger
starts
and
to
sleep.
yeah, this is
Yeah.
it. And if he's had a really early morning, like we spoke about this before, didn't we, before we like press record, if he wakes up any earlier than, I would say, 5 o'clock, which he does occasionally, even though he doesn't wake up in the night, or he has a late night and still wakes up, I mean, it starts to become accumulated fatigue then, and that's when it starts to get quite mental. Historically, generationally, we've been brought up very different to how we bring our children up now.
Yeah.
My mum and dad were very much like, you've got to sit down, you got to have your dinner, the TV's off, all that sort of stuff. And I think that's just how you've been brought up. But actually,
Yeah.
just because, and I think a lot of it, and this is where I think my husband struggled, I think he feels that going against the grain of how he was brought up by his parents is wrong. Like, it means that my mum and dad, like, I didn't have a good upbringing, or that my mum and dad aren't good parents. And I'm like, it's not that at all. I was like, but things change and people change, and it's your mum and dad brought up you how they were brought up.
Yeah.
Like,
And also
that's
what
how you
works for
brought
your
us.
husband, for
Yeah,
sure, but it
exactly.
doesn't work for your son. And I think that's the
Exactly.
difficulty, isn't it? It's recognizing, okay, that's fine. There was nothing wrong with the way that was,
Stop it,
but that just doesn't work
with it.
here.
Yeah, exactly. And I said that you need to shift your mindset that, so what if you have to get him his drink, or he's sat right there and the remote control is literally like, he could get it, but he just doesn't want to get it, and he can't get it because when it explodes and it's chaos and the meltdowns are full throttle, it takes at least 90 minutes for them to come back down. So you're not going to be able, you're not going to be able to rationalize with them for a minimum of an hour and a half, if not longer. But actually, if you could just prevent that from happening by getting them their drink, getting them dressed, passing them a lecture, it's just a win-win situation.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we face
absolutely.
meltdowns like that, and they are hard.
They're
They
hard.
last for at
And
least an hour, and they are
yeah,
really tough.
and the thing is, Kirsty, it's also for you as a parent, that emotional resilience. Like, there it comes a point, like, we are all humans, and we are all, when you are being screamed at, shouted at, even though you
Yeah.
know it's out of their control, it makes you feel shit. But also, your nervous system is then dysregulated, and it takes you a good 90 minutes to then get yourself back down.
Yeah.
I mean, and I've done it previously. I've kept very, very calm, and then it's just, something's been thrown at me, and then I've lost it, and then I'm
Yeah.
like, ah! And then you can't, you just have to leave it, because otherwise, I mean, when we were really in the trenches, I mean, some days it was just so hellish, and it would go on for hours, or you'd manage to like put the fire out, and then what would happen? It hadn't subsided enough, and it would blow up again, and it would just keep on like a fire that could never fully go out.
Just a hard place to be, and it's obviously, it's not just him and the family. He's got siblings. You're trying to juggle all of this stuff, and you just don't
No,
live like that on a day-to-day basis. It's just not a pleasant place to be.
Yeah.
it's not, and it's just, and then if you've got other children, to the others, the whole of our house revolves around him.
Yeah.
And then we were starting to see like resentment, a bit of bitterness. Why does he get away with it and I don't? Our eldest son, totally, he gets it now. He's nearly 16, but you know, he's only just turned 16. So 3 years ago, he was 13, and he couldn't fathom it. But his twin brother is obviously the same age as him, and why does he do that? Why do I have to go and get my stuff? Why
Yeah.
can't you get it?
Yeah. And I guess it's something because it was something that wasn't very well known about for such a long time, and it's something everyone I think is trying to get their head around.
Yeah, because do you know what? Till I started my Instagram page, I actually didn't know any parents of PDA. Didn't know any of the PDA kids. I
Yeah,
said to
yeah.
my husband, I just wonder. I was like, do you reckon there's anybody else out there? I was like, there must be, but I don't know anybody. And obviously, specialist school, we don't meet the parents because obviously transport, and that's just how it works. But there are thousands, hundreds, thousands of parents in the UK, well, and overseas, that have got children that have got PDA profiles. But again, a lot of them are not seen, they're not heard, and they're not understood, because education settings, medical professionals, they're just like, well, it's not really, because it's not in the DSM-5 manual.
Yeah.
They're just like, it's not a thing. And you're like, well, it is a thing, because my child's got it.
Yeah, and you say on your page as well that 70% of children with PDA are being homeschooled at some point
Yeah,
during their
just not,
education.
yeah, or not in education at all. The problem with the UK schooling system is the fact that there are more provisions that are geared up for ASD and ADHD. They're like the primary ones. But the PDA, because it's childhood learning, and it needs to be sometimes more of a trauma-based approach to learning, they just don't have the provision for it. And because it's really difficult to navigate that. And it's a complete mindset shift for the teachers also, that they need to be able to change. Whereas our education system's rigid, it's old, it's out of date, it doesn't fit anymore, it doesn't fit the demographics of a lot of our children. I mean, it blows my mind that after all these years, I'm 45, I left school 30 years ago, they're still doing it exactly the same. It's mad, it doesn't make any sense. And actually, I think if the mainstream education system was overhauled, you could probably prevent more children going into burnout via different teaching methods. I mean, I can't sit down at a desk for an hour and a half without moving, but kids have to. Like, that's it.
The problem is as well, and you were telling your story, I was thinking, because Kirsty and I had an EHCP at nursery stage, when we went into the school setting, everything was kind of set up for them. But for your son, everything was fine up until that point. So there was no need for you to even start going down that route. And then when you did, you're then in a position where he's already struggling, and then there's that fight that you've had to get him where he needs to be.
the thing that's worse for parents that have got PDA children, a lot of the time, it doesn't get picked up until they start
Yeah.
mainstream school.
I always wonder where the line is, because it has been mentioned to us previously about PDA, but I don't know where the line is between demand avoidance as part of ASD and then
Yeah.
PDA.
The pathological part of it, like I said, it's always there. There's always a stress. There's anxiety, and that's what drives PDA is high levels of anxiety.
Mm.
So, but this is where I think the misdiagnosis then comes in also, because a lot of children that are autistic have demand avoidance because they can't do stuff, and
Yeah.
that's, you know, if you don't, it's a normal human reaction. If you don't know how to do something, you're going to avoid doing it, because that's just how, that's just, you know, like a normal response. But you know, it's heightened with PDA. It can be quite severe. Some of the stories that parents share with me, and you know, they're in the absolute trenches, and they just feel like nobody actually believes them,
Yeah.
which is a really sad and a really dangerous place to be for
Yeah.
parents that are
Very
already.
lonely. Yeah.
It's
Yeah, that's
really
tough.
lonely, and it's, you know, sort of basically being told by healthcare professionals that you're basically a liar,
Yeah.
and that you're making this stuff up about your child, and these people are going through, you know, and obviously got a community of PDA parents that I run, and we were sort of saying months ago, when it's really bad, it's actually like being in an abusive relationship. Like, that is how it feels. They can be so overpowering of you. They're so controlling of you. You can't, you know, you can't leave them. You've got to sit with them. You have to play with them, and then if you don't, they like punch you in the side of the head. So it's like being in this traumatic abusive relationship. And when you go to a medical professional, you sort of try and share that, and they're like, well, no, I don't see that.
Or it's your parenting.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really lucky. I've had a few people saying, "Oh, you need to be a bit stricter," and I'm just like, nah. But yeah, I know there are a lot of parents that get told it's
Mm.
stricter parenting that would help, or have you tried more structure? That's the one I get quite. Have you tried having a bit more of a better routine? I'm like, I am the most organised routine.
Like, I wouldn't have tried that
I'm the
as well.
queen.
The most routine, organised, driven person anyway. And I think that sometimes people just, I say, oh, but you know, I have got an older son. Like this, I'm not a first time parent.
Yeah, yeah.
I do know, I do have experience of raising children.
Yeah, you'd hope, wouldn't you, that the more they find out about it, maybe it will be named as separate, because at the moment, is it linked to other
It's
conditions?
ASD. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's ASD and AD. I mean, I would say the majority of children, well, parents that I know now really quite well that have got children, it is, they've all got ASD and ADHD.
So I guess the final question would be, what advice would you give for parents at the start of their journey? There's probably many listening right now that I think my child might have a PDA profile. What would be, yeah, your advice to them?
I think first off, straight away, there's nothing you can do to avoid it. Like, I think a lot of people think, you know, what, I should have done something, because that is sometimes how it's positioned to you as a parent. You know, it's bad, like we said, it's bad parenting. There's nothing you could have done to avoid them having a PDA profile. But I strongly suggest like using the panda approach. That's on the PDA Society website, and that's a really good strategy for getting started. Um, and I said this earlier, it's the majority, I think, of parenting a child with PDA comes down to having a mindset shift. And it has to be, when you're really, really struggling, it isn't that they won't do something, it is that they can't do something. It's very, very difficult for them. So, you know, to give yourself a break, do stuff for them. If it makes your life easier, then really, really just do it. Because I think from the start, I struggled with well, like, surely he can just do it himself. And then it just ended up just being really stressful on more so my behalf. And also something else that I would suggest, if your child is an internalizing PDA, and you know, and just the behavior is out of control when they come home from school, just document everything and find yourself a good occupational therapist that can observe them at school, that actually knows about PDA, because they will notice and observe sort of key indicators of PDA that will help them get that EHCP, to get that specialist school placement.
Thank you so much, Jessie, for joining us and sharing your story and offering so much advice to everyone. Jessie's page on Instagram is at Mrs. Jessie Townz. Have a look. It's brilliant. Jessie, thank you so much.
Thank you.